Hello, welcome back. This is the Terry Nutlock Model Railway Station. A light here for all things model railways. Today we're going to be making 3 different types of fences for your model railway. We're also going to be deciding, is it worth making them or is it worth buying them? Stay tuned, we're going to find out. Welcome back. So the first model fence that we're going to be making is a security fence. Now to do this, I'm going to be using cocktail sticks, which I've already cut to a scale for 00 gauge of around about 8 foot high, because that's roughly what a security fence would be. It's going to be quite high to stop people climbing over. And similarly, I've cut this mesh. Now this mesh is an aluminium mesh that I've bought actually in the form from Temu as a modelling mesh, but it's exactly the same mesh that you can get from car repair shops, and it's meant for body repairs, and it's meant to be used with car body filler to repair dents in cars. You can get it in quite big sheets at a very reasonable price. So this is quite an affordable item here, and I've got a sheet this size. As I say, I got that from Temu. I think that cost about £1.45, but you can buy it from car supply shops, body repair shops, much cheaper in even bigger sheets, and it cuts very easily with scissors. So I've cut this to be a scale 8 foot high. Now, interestingly, I was going to ask you, the viewers, that in the UK we have a rather weird understanding of using millimetres and feet mixed together, because 00 gauge is 4 millimetres to the foot. And I was wondering if you could put in the comments, the viewers from Europe and from North America, because you don't have that system, what do you do? Do you just call it 1:87 or HO scale? Because we often say 4 millimetres to the foot or 7 millimetres to the foot for O gauge in the UK. And it seems a strange way of talking, mixing imperial and metric together. And I was just wondering if you do that in Europe and North America. And please feel free to put comments and tell me how you express yourselves in modelling terms like that. I really am quite interested. So, as I say, this is a scale 8 foot high, and it's a scale 32 feet long. So we're going to be putting the posts on, and then we're going to be attaching it to this foam board, simply because it's easy to push the posts into. And when I've done the 3 different types of fencing, I'm going to paint them and do a little diorama to show them finished. So let's get straight on. Okay, so you're going to have to excuse me a little bit, I'm afraid, because my voice is a little bit croaky. I've picked up a rather nasty chest infection at one of the exhibitions I was at a few weeks ago, and it's on the mend now, but I'm still left with a slightly croaky voice, so apologies for that. Now, what we're going to be doing is using an impact adhesive on these cocktail sticks to stick them to the metal fence. And what we're going to be using here is, hold it up the right way, Evo Stick impact adhesive. Now, there's lots of glues you can use. You could use the superphatic glue that I've used quite a few times, but I find that this impact adhesive works quite well sticking wood to metal, which is effectively what we're doing here. So what we need to do is put a very thin film of the impact glue along the cocktail sticks, and then we're just going to let it go off, not set, but start to go tacky, and that would take about 5 minutes. So we just put a little thin film. As you can see, it's all gushing out of the tube, which tends to happen. A little bit too much on the first one there. Now, this is why I'm working on the hobby board and the cutting mat, because you don't want to be getting glue all over your nice table. We're going to just let that glue settle on these cocktail sticks. I've got 5 here. I'm going to put a little bit of glue on these 2 end supports. You'll see them in a moment. Now, Desmond will be telling us when we're using this, it can give off some fumes, so always work in a well ventilated room. Don't work in a room with the door closed and all the windows shut, because this can give off some fumes. Okay, so we're just going to wait 5 minutes now, and when we come back this will have gone nice and tacky, and I'll show you the next stage. Okay, so a few minutes have passed now. We've got the aluminium mesh, and I'm going to simply, these are already starting to get quite tacky, put the cocktail sticks onto the mesh, one at either end to start with. Now you could accurately measure out 8 feet or 6 feet between each one of these posts if you wanted to. I'm not going to bother. I'm going to do it roughly by eye. It depends how accurate you want this to be. If you wanted to, you could quite easily mark the mesh with a felt pen, as I marked it with a Sharpie marker, to cut it to the size. Now, as you can see, they're already sticking, and there's a little bit of the post sticking out the bottom, which I shall use for sticking into the foam. So we carry on roughly a third of the way along with this one. Think about there. Of course, you could always use the markers on the cutting mat as a guide. Now, I've certainly not measured them out equally, as you can see. It doesn't matter, this is a demonstration, but obviously if you wanted to do it a little bit more accurately, you could, and that would have a beneficial effect overall. And finally, these two last little pieces I've cut with slight angles, I'm going to use them at the end, just as you would see a support for the end posts, giving them extra strength. Just using the tweezers here slightly, making sure they're orientated the right way round. I'll give you a little close up to the camera once this is done. Not really fiddly. There we are, little push on, and that's already taken. If I hold that up to the camera, as you can see, it's already taken, it's already fixed, and that's your security fence. And what we're going to do is bring the foam over, and we're going to plant that into the foam. Now, ideally, you really want to wait a little bit longer for these cocktail sticks to absolutely set perfectly onto the wire, but I'm going to show you, rushing ahead slightly, with a bit of gentle easing in at the same time, we can actually get that to go in. Of course, being foam, it's quite easy to push them in. If you were using a baseboard that was much sturdier than the foam, then I'd recommend that you waited for these cocktail sticks to set completely on the fence. But there we go. And that is the first fence, the security fence. As I say, you saw how quickly I made that. A little bit more time, if you measure out the posts exactly, you could get a much more accurate fence. But I think that's quite a good representation of a security fence that only took just a couple of minutes to make. So once we've done all the fences, I'm going to paint them, and as I say, put some little bits of scatter and scenery on and give you an idea of what they look like finished. So let's move on to the next type of fence. Right, so the next fence we're going to make is a country style post and rail fence, and we're just going to be using the cocktail sticks for this. Now basically, as you can see, these cocktail sticks have a pointed end on both ends. Some do, some don't. And because of that, I'm going to cut these basically in the middle and use the pointed end twice to effectively make two posts, which we're going to stick into the foam again. So I'm going to chop up 4 posts. We're only going to make a fence 4 posts long, just to show you. So we cut 2 of these in half. I'm going to be using the little snippers. Of course, you could use scissors or a craft knife. I'm going to put it on the board, just get a rough idea of where the middle is, which is there approximately. Hold on to both halves. You'll find if you snip them with scissors or these snippers, if you don't hold on to both halves, one half will go flying across the room at 100 miles an hour and you'll lose it in the carpet. It's not dangerous, of course, it's only wood, but you'll end up losing half of them on the floor somewhere. Same thing again, cut. And now we've got the 4 main posts that we're going to be using. We're going to be arranging these in the foam, again at roughly 6 foot intervals, a scale of 6 foot for 00 gauge. And we're going to be using cocktail sticks as posts running across. Now we could just try sticking them on like that, but of course there's nothing to make them stick onto. So in order to make it slightly easier, we're going to use a file, and we're just going to put a tiny notch in the top of each cocktail stick. This is a triangular file, so I'm just using the triangular piece of the file, triangular edge of the file, just to put a little notch. You don't need to go too mad. If you do, you'll find you'll end up cutting through the whole cocktail stick, of course. You just want to put a little notch, enough for the actual crossbar to have something to sit into. We're going to do the same slightly further down, and then we're going to repeat this on all 4 posts. So we'll jump ahead slightly. This will only take a couple of minutes, but I don't think you'll want to watch that. So we're basically going to do that 4 times. Right, so all 4 of these posts now have 2 little notches in. And what we're going to do now is use the impact adhesive and just put a tiny little spot of glue in each one of these notches. And again, while we're just waiting for it to go slightly off, we'll stick these posts into the foam. Okay, so while that glue starts to go tacky, what I'm going to do here is with the foam, this time I'm actually going to mark the board. Now this is a scale rule. You don't have to have one of these. It's simply marked out with scale feet in different gauges. We've got 2mm, i.e. N gauge, 4mm, that's 00 in the UK, and 7mm to the foot, which is O gauge. So using the 00 again, I'm going to mark out 6 feet intervals. So if we come back there, so that would be 6 fours would be 24. We're going to come back from there. We'll do a little gap rather than try and squeeze that in. Of course, if you were doing a fence, you could make it come right up. So we're going to go 1. So that's 1, 6, 12, and 16. Should be 18. That's my maths. There we go, of course. So 6, 12, 18, 24. I'll have to ignore that one. That's my poor maths, I'm afraid there. You'd never believe I worked at the CERN Collider, would you? And you'd be wise not to. So now what we're gonna do is take the posts and orientate them with those little cutouts roughly facing towards the camera, because that's the way the posts are going to be attached. So we're going to put each one in. Now this time we're going to put the posts into the foam first. I'm going to push them down, and these aren't quite as high as the security fence, so we're going to bring them down a little bit like to that. They don't have to be exact, and the rails being slightly offset will actually make this look more realistic. And now we're going to use cocktail sticks to go across. So we do the same. We're going to cut the ends off, holding it just to cut off that little pointy bit at the end. You could actually use that part, but we're not going to use that. We're going to cut them so. And these are going to go across too. We're going to cut that to there. Doing it all by eye. And we're simply going to attach that to the lower rail, to where the lower cutouts are. A little bit fiddly. I think we'll use the tweezers. Like so. Hold it for a second. There we go. That could actually do with a tiny bit more glue on the posts. I think I've left it a little bit too long and it started to settle. Now for the bottom one, as you can see, you're going to have to slightly overlap that. So like a rural country fence would be. We'll snip a piece off, we'll get a rough measurement. It would be about there. We're going to use this piece. The tweezers again. So with that rail, simply put it there and above the other one. And with enough glue on, that's taken instantly. We just do the reverse on the top rail. Now that post is actually set back quite a way. So what we can do with that is put a little nick in the back of the bar and bend it enough that it will follow to the middle post. There we go. It's done. We do the last cross piece as we've done all the others. As you can see, I'm not measuring these. I'm doing them really just by eye. We use the tweezers as this one's a little bit fiddly. We'll go onto the end piece. I'm looking down, doing it all a bit close for my aging eyesight. Obviously that all needs to set. I'll hold it up. As you can see, that's quite a rural fence, the sort of fence that you'd find in the countryside along a field, just as a marker. It wouldn't be particularly useful for keeping animals in. Posts are quite spread out, but it's a sort of fence, as I'll show you there. The posts aren't all standing up perfectly accurately as a country fence would be. Some are leaning over slightly. I think that's quite an accurate fence depiction for a rural fence, certainly the sort of marker that you'll find on rural railways in Europe, just as a divider to alert people that they're coming to the edge of a railway. So the last fence that we're going to do is made from plastic hard and from wire, and it's a concrete post with a metal rail fencing. Let's get onto that now. Right, so for the last fence we're going to be doing, which is a concrete post with metal rail type fence, we rely on our good old friends Temu. So firstly, we're going to be using a little handheld drill. They call this a pin drill, and I've got some little drill bits that came from Temu. Of course, you can get them from modelling shops, but you really do need something like that to do this job. I've got some 1mm diameter brass straight wire that came from Temu, and I also got this little selection box from Temu of plastic shapes. Now basically we've got all different sorts. We've got round rod, but we've got some 2mm square section here, which makes very good scale 6 inch by 6 inch concrete posts, and that's what we're going to be using. This whole pack, I believe, cost something like £6 from Temu. And if you bought all of those sections separately from your local model shop, that would cost you about £30. So you've really got quite a bargain. There's no choice. It's a bit of a selection pack and you get what you're given. But I found them very useful and I think they're quite good value. So we're certainly going to be using this piece to carry on with this concrete fencing. So let's get these out and we're going to cut them into a scale of 4 foot high. So as you can see, if the camera can focus on that, that's 2mm square styrene rod, as they call it. Of course, a rod doesn't have to be round. And we're going to be cutting this to a scale height of 4 feet. So that's 4 fours, which is 16mm, and we'll allow another, say, 5 or 6mm to poke it into the foam. So using the 10mm gaps on the cutting board, basically I'm going to cut them to 30mm. So holding it there, going to use the snips again. Of course you could mark all this properly. I'm rushing through it slightly to just show you how simple some of these fences are to make. You could take a lot longer to do this, and you could do them slightly more accurately. As I say, I'm rushing through slightly, cut that one a little bit short. It really doesn't matter too much. It's just for demonstration purposes, as they say. We'll do another couple. So what we're going to do now is mark them. I'm going to just use this Sharpie marker, and we want to mark the rails going across at roughly the same height. So we're just going to put a little dot across there, and again, if that's 20, we'll put one just there. It doesn't have to be absolutely exact, but the more accurate you keep them, the more realistic it will look, because these type of fences do tend to have fairly parallel cross rails running across them. So now we need to drill just a slightly larger than 1mm hole through each one of these posts. We need to drill 2 holes. I'm going to use the pin vise, pin drill, and the little mini drill bits to do that. And once I've drilled the holes, I'll show you what comes next. Right, so what I've done is I've drilled 2 holes through each one of these little squares. I'll be honest with you, I had to use a drill bit from this little microbox set of drills. I was getting through with the Temu drill bits, but the actual pin vise drill is fine, but the drill bits weren't as sharp as I'd have liked. I'll be honest with you, what do you get for £3.95? They were cutting through the plastic, but it was taking a bit of time, and with a very sharp 1.2mm drill bit, I did the other 3 in the time it took to do the first one with the Temu bit. So there we go, little tip. Possibly the Temu bits aren't as sharp as you'd like them to be. So now what we're going to do is use the 1mm brass, and we're going to just basically thread this through onto the posts. Always put the rail through onto the posts first. Don't put the posts into the board and then try to thread the rail through. It's very difficult. So always put the post and the rail through the post first, and then plant the posts onto the board. So what I'm going to do, because we're going to be doing the same basic 24 foot roughly, we're going to measure out the same against there. Again, I'm just doing it by eye. I'm going to cut it with the cutters, holding on, making sure we don't get wire shooting across the room. That one is just a tiny bit long, but that's fine. Now all I'm going to do with these is, with the tweezers, put a tiny little bend in the end just to stop the post slipping off, because it becomes quite frustrating if once you've threaded them through the posts then start falling off the other end. So by putting a tiny little bend with the tweezers, of course you could use pliers, anything at all, just to put a little bend in. There we go, I use the nippers here. Little curve is all we need, and simply thread the posts on. So we're going to thread through the bottom ones first. It doesn't matter which way you go. We'll put all 4 of the posts on at the bottom to start with. And at this point, of course, they go in all directions. We do the same with the top rail, put a slight bend in it, just bending it down slightly. Now we thread them through the top, and this is where the fence starts to become solid. This is where, of course, again, because they're slightly different angles, where the first bar was easy to thread through, the top one now is not difficult, but takes a little bit more time. And if you were to have 3 or 4 bars on this fence, it just takes a little bit longer and a little bit more patience. So we'll adjust it until those are at the end, and that roughly is what our fence is going to look like. We're going to trim that off once we put it into the board. So we're going to mark this out now on the foam with the marker, as we've done before. And we're going to mark them at 6 foot intervals. Now, because these square posts, they're not going to push in so easily into the foam, and we'll need to make a little hole for them. And to do that, we're going to use the tweezers and just put a little hole into the foam to help them go in. We can push the foam posts now into the foam, settle them down. You can push down quite hard onto these because these plastic posts are actually quite sturdy. They're the strongest of the fences we've made so far, and they do push down into the foam, taking quite a bit of resistance. So now we'll just cut those end pieces off at approximately the right distance. Now, what we can do is add a tiny drop of superphatic or something like that to those little joins just to seal them up. You could use super glue. I wouldn't recommend using super glue on the foam. You could use super glue on the plastic and the metal, but on the foam I would always use the superphatic, which is like a PVA glue and won't affect the foam. So we just put a tiny bit of superphatic on there, and then we're just going to put a commercial fence on, and then finally we'll come back and see what they look like finished off. Right, so here we are. There's the superphatic that we like to use all the time, and as you can see, I've put some superphatic around the base and just put a tiny smear of it on the wire, although the wire won't fall out, but it makes it all secure. And finally, I've put a piece of wheels line side fencing there. That's commercially available. I'm not quite sure of the exact price of it now. I bought that for 4 lengths for £4.95, I believe it was. I may have paid slightly over the odds for it because I've seen it advertised since for about £3.95 for 4 lengths. So you're looking basically about £1 a foot to buy this commercially available fencing. So what I'm going to do now is paint all of this up, put a tiny bit of static grass or scatter on just to make it look like a field, so that you actually see them in a finished diorama, and then we can see what we think of each one of these fences, and we can come to the conclusion, do we make our own fences or do we buy them? So I'm just going to finish these off and we'll see them in a minute. So here is the finished little diorama. As you can see, I've painted all the fences now and put a little bit of ground cover off from the Temu range just to try and make it look a little bit more realistic. So if we look at the fences, we can see that the security fence there, I've simply painted the posts a brown colour and very lightly painted the mesh with a metallic aluminium colour. Similarly, I've painted the posts all with a mahogany colour. I've painted the ratio or wheels fencing there in the same mahogany leather colour. I've painted the concrete posts a grey with a metallic for the rails, and as you can see on the end there, I didn't think that the original concrete post and metal rail fence did it justice, so I've done it again. It took me 10 minutes and I put a middle rail in. I think that makes it look much more realistic. Sort of fencing that you'd see at the seaside on a promenade, something like that. Of course, it could also be used in a modern setting, in a farmyard, or indeed in an industrial area. So all of these fences, obviously this one is commercial. It's a ratio or wheels fence available immediately just to plant straight from the pack. But all of these fence types are available commercially. The security fencing is available from ratio. The post and rail type fencing is available from ratio. And the wooden country rustic fencing is available from many manufacturers, ratio, wheels, and on the continent, Fala and indeed Knock make a very good rustic post and rail fence. So what do? Do you make them or do you buy them? Well, as with anything, of course, it depends on the time you've got. If you've got a huge amount of fencing to do and you don't have a lot of time, then buying fencing is an option. Of course, it can prove to be quite costly. As you've seen in doing these fences, no one of these pieces took longer than 3 or 4 minutes to do. They're all quite quick. And of course, the post and rail fencing with the toothpicks is very, very cheap to do. A pack of toothpicks will cost you less than £1, and you can make a lot of fencing with that. It's simply time. So I would say have a go. Have a go at making your own fences. You can follow these designs. Of course, you can do your own designs. And it's all a skill that you can learn and add to your collection of skills and abilities. And if you don't use them and decide in the end that you'd like to use commercially purchased fences, then go ahead and do that. But at least it's practice and it's something that you're learning to do. So I'd say have a go, as I've done here, on a little diorama, see how you get on, and you might find that making fences is something you really enjoy. You could save yourself a lot of money, and of course you can make custom fences to be suitable for areas on hills and in yards where commercial fencing might not be suitable. So if you enjoyed this episode, I'd like to say thank you for listening to my croaky voice all the way through. And if you like it, please like and subscribe, share with somebody else, and please do leave comments about how you like fences, what you do with your fencing, and also, as I said, how you describe the scale that you work on in where you are in the world. As we say, in the UK, we have 4mm to the foot, a rather unusual combination, but there we go. How do you describe it where you are? So thanks very much, and all that's left to say is our usual catchphrase, nice one. I'll see you next time.